Good morning, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone here this morning for this important press conference to talk about the rationalization project which the government has undertaken with the assistance of E&Y. Before I start, I want to introduce those that are with me. I think everyone knows the Deputy Governor, Franz Manderson, on my left. To my right, I have the Regional Managing Partner of E&Y, Mr. Dan Scott. And to his right, Ms. Larnie de Courtney, who is one of the partners in E&Y from Australia and who specializes in government practice. So today we want to be able to explain a bit about the process, about the project, about where we're at and where we still have to get to, and to be able to answer any questions that the media may have. Let me say at the start that I think most people in the media will know that I have expressed concerns for a long time, even before I actually took over as Premier, about the need to contain the overall costs of the public service. There has been what I could probably call an explosion in the growth of the size of the public service over the course of the past decade, and that has created and is continuing to create immense pressures on government, the way government operates, and on government expenditure. We are right now still facing that challenge, and in large part the reason why we haven't managed to deliver a budget so far is because we have been struggling, grappling with the personnel cost element of the overall budget. So this is a very real issue and very live issue that hasn't gone away and will not go away anytime soon. The need to contain the cost of the public service. I have said in the past, and I say again, and I will say probably when I get up to speak to the budget, that the only way that we are going to achieve a sustainable reduction in the overall cost of the public service is to be able to rationalize many of the services that government currently provides, and determine which of these could be more efficiently, more effectively, more cheaply performed by the private sector. The other aspect is also possible amalgamation of a number of the services that and agencies that government that are currently part of government. And this exercise will look at all of these things. I want to make it clear that rationalization is not privatization. I think a rather simplistic view has been taken by some, that it is simply a matter of saying you just sell off this agency or that company or those set of services to the private sector. The exercise that E&Y are conducting is a rationalization of the services to determine how best these particular services can be provided generally, and to make recommendations to government about possible restructuring, amalgamations, or indeed possible privatization. So they are undertaking a strategic overview of the public service to identify those functions that would be better carried out with private sector involvement. And they will also review the number of bespoke government entities to identify opportunities to streamline government structure, and also review government assets and recommend those that can be sold where a fair market exists. They will also are also in the process of assessing those recommendations which have not yet been implemented, arising from prior internal and external reports. This exercise will allow government to reassess its core business and to realign its expenditures accordingly. It will focus efforts on improving service delivery in such areas and redirect savings into critical areas of core government that are presently under-resourced. And it will allow us, we believe, to tackle both the growth rate in the tax burden for the average citizen and to accelerate the process of retiring government debt. And we should also be able, as a result, to redirect the savings which we achieve into critical government infrastructure development, which is lacking. So I think in broad strokes, that is what the exercise is aimed at. I will ask the Deputy Governor really to go into more detail about how the process is going to work and to also introduce the team that is guiding this exercise. Deputy Governor.
Thank you very much, Premier, and good morning. For almost a decade, the Cayman Islands Civil Service has embarked on a process of public sector reforms. These initiatives have yielded many positive fruits on behalf of the country. Internally, such achievements include the adoption of accrual accounting and a modern, efficient human resource framework. Externally, such endeavors have elevated standards of transparency and public accountability, thanks in part to the enactment of legislation governing freedom of information, complaints, human rights, and the standards in public life, to name a few. In addition to policy changes, the Civil Service has adopted prolonged austerity measures, which the Premier alluded to earlier, which have contributed to positive fiscal results for the government. As noteworthy as these results are, like other governments around the world, we cannot afford to be complacent, as the Premier discussed. We must structure ourselves today to meet the challenges of the future. To this end, we have enlisted an able partner with a local presence and global experience. EY has assembled a team comprising of members in the Cayman Islands, UK, Bermuda, Australia, and New Zealand, who have direct experience in transforming the delivery of public services through consolidations and private sector engagement. The objectives of the project are to, and I think the Premier said it, but I just want to go over it in detail, to undertake a strategic overview of the entire public service with the exception of our judiciary, to identify which services could be better carried out with private sector involvement. Identify entities that are suitable for mergers or consolidations. Identify opportunities where there's a market appetite and capability for private sector engagement with public services. Review the government assets and recommend those that could be sold to the private sector where a fair market exists. To review and report on financial, social, and economic benefits, cost, and risk to government, and to minimize impact on stakeholders, government employees, public sector levels, and private sector business. This process, and I want to emphasize this, is quite distinct from approaches taken in the past, where past reviews examined how government might perform existing functions more efficiently and effectively. This approach looked to identify opportunities to transform government, not only by examining how services are delivered, but by keeping an open mind as to who delivers these services. The current process allows us to think in the broadest terms as to where services may be more effectively delivered through alternative delivery methods, such as consolidating or merging existing for consolidating or merging existing entities, outsourcing services, sale of assets, or by engaging existing staff and or local entrepreneurs to deliver the services on behalf of the government. Most importantly, and I think you all have alluded to this before, this process will conclude with recommendations and for the first time a roadmap for implementation. Given the foregoing and under the direction of the Premier and his elected government, and I just want to pause to thank the Premier and his elected leaders for, first of all, insisting that we go through this exercise, but also to give us the support that we need on the political level to carry out this exercise. We also have engaged the FCO, and they have undertook to provide us with some advice and on the strategic side as well. I'm confident that the Civil Service will again deliver exceptional results for the country. As head of the Civil Service, I embrace this goal and will help champion this strategic project. To that end, a steering committee has been established, which I chair. Other members who are most of here are in this room with us this morning, include Councillor Winston Connolly, who is here, Cabinet Secretary Sam Rose, Chief Officer for the Portfolio Civil Service, Ms. Gloria McField-Nixon, Chief Officer in the Ministry of Education, Ms. Mary Rodriguez, and my strategic advisor, Mr. Peter Goff. We also have a talented project team, which include internal auditors, Ms. Dolores Gordon and Jay Otter, Acting Deputy Chief Officer for the Portfolio of Civil Service, Mr. Matthew Tibbetts, and other key staff members, including Lilia Conley, Teresa Echenike, Suzette E. Banks, and Janice McLean. And we have been very deliberate in exposing some of our most talented civil servants to this exercise so that we can have some knowledge transfer and we can upskill the people that we have in the service. This process, the process being followed is very consultative. With the assistance of the project team, E&Y is consulting broadly, including with the elected government, chief officers, and their heads of department and public authorities. With the Chamber of Commerce, and up to this morning, they met with the Cayman Islands Civil Service Association. To ensure proper consideration is given to the financial, social, and economic implications of the review, 7 guiding principles were developed. These are to preserve or enhance service levels and standards, to ensure fair and equitable treatment of existing staff, to attract local participation to provide public services under ownership of government assets where a fair market exists, to communicate with stakeholders throughout the process, to maximize employment of Caymanians, to promote fair competition in the marketplace, and to consider the economic, financial, and social implications of the rationalization. It is not possible at this stage to speculate on what specific recommendations may be made. However, as set out in the guiding principles, I wish to assure public servants that once decisions are made, these will be communicated in a clear and timely manner, and that throughout the process, all staff will receive fair and equitable treatment. And that's very important to us as a good employer, that we ensure that we treat our staff fairly and equitably. Together, the public service and private sector have an opportunity to secure a better, more viable future for the public service and for the people of the Cayman Islands. I want to thank you for your attention, and I'll pass the microphone on to Mr. Dan Scott of EY.
Good morning, and thank you all very much. And just on behalf of EY, I do want to say this is a project that when we had the opportunity to get involved in it, it was one that I've taken a personal interest in, because as we look at Cayman and our ability to continue to support what we need to do as we grow and move forward into the next generation, it's critically important that we get it right within the civil service. All too often we haven't looked at the history of how we get to where we're at, and it has been built over a number of years. And quite honestly, in many cases, those of us in the private sector can Monday morning quarterback, but we sometimes fail to give credit that this thing was built over a period of time as the private sector was also built. And I have the experience, and I won't admit how old I am, but you know, growing up in a time when Cayman it was very, very basic. And so they built and the private sector grew alongside it. So on the other hand, we do need to give credit for that, but it's like anything else we do, it's time to take pause and see how we can re-engineer and make it more effective. And I think one of the key things that sometimes get lost in this is if you build it and make it more effective, it provides even more opportunities to make sure that it is able to attract in the civil servant the right kind of talent, which continues to facilitate what we in the private sector need to do. But as with anything, there's no question that many would say change is the only constant. So we also need to be prepared to look at change and embrace it. And based on the guiding principles and the things that we've been asked to do and the team that we've put together, I'm absolutely confident we'll be able to do that. I've taken a personal interest in it, and will be very involved in the process, because ultimately, while we can deliver solutions, it needs to be delivering solutions that have an understanding of what the local marketplace needs, and not just solutions that come out of a textbook. On the back of that, we've assembled an impressive and very talented team with deep knowledge and deep experience, and you've heard from Mr. Manderson and from Mayor McLaughlin what we've done around that. And at this time, I'll turn it over to one such member who has deep experience within government and rationalization and similar projects, Darlington Courtney, who hails to us from Australia, and I keep trying to tell her we did, among other things, manage to have her eat some local fare the other night, which she thoroughly enjoyed. So I'll turn it over to Larnie.
Thank you. Thank you, Dan. Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for having me this morning. I wanted to give you a bit of a feel for, I suppose, why we're reaching out globally for this project, and I suppose why I'm here interested in helping on this engagement. My history or my experience has been in advising governments in Australia for the last 18 or so years, and specifically in the last 10 years as government has tried to understand how it can meet its increasing infrastructure development needs as well as retain increasing costs within government. And it's been looking at ways to examine which services and businesses it really needs to be in and which services and businesses it can rely on the private sector for, with appropriate regulations and controls in place to protect consumers against increased prices or any sort of monopoly situation. So it's a careful process that we've undertaken in Australia to examine options, and I hope to be able to bring some of that experience to the table here in Cayman. But I'll just point out a couple of other members of the team that we have advising on this before I talk about more specifics. We have John Marsh, who's one of our very senior partners in the UK, who has worked with Her Excellency the Governor in a previous life in the civil service in the UK, and he is one of our strategic advisory board members who we're going to be testing and all of our recommendations with. We also have Craig Hill, who's our New Zealand Performance Improvement Advisor, and he's going to be on that strategic advisory board, and he has advised New Zealand Treasury on a range of improvements around budgeting and financial management, as well as implementing shared services within the New Zealand public service. In addition, there's our global infrastructure and government leader called Bill Banks. He's sort of a global infrastructure and PPP advisor, and he travels the world looking at what's happening right across the globe in terms of public-private partnerships, particularly around infrastructure, as well as advising the Western Australian government recently on a review of 10 of their assets, including ports, electricity companies, lotteries, etc., for a potential asset sale roadmap, which the Western Australian government has asked EY to perform. So, in addition to Rohan Small and Kieran Hutchinson from the EY Cayman practice, we feel that we've brought together a really very strong team, both globally and locally, to bring the best of EY to this engagement, which I believe is incredibly important. I suppose I just wanted to give a bit of an overview of the types of solutions that we have seen elsewhere in the world that may be relevant here, or they may not be. And I think it's important to as Mr. Scott said, to not just transplant one solution from one geography or market to here. And that's going to be something we're looking very carefully at. But there are options that we have implemented in Australia and the UK around IPO. So IPOing various, listing various government assets for public and investment, trade sale of different businesses, given a certain level of regulation is in place over those businesses going forward, such as ports and electricity assets. Outsourcing of things such as road maintenance, creating shared services within government, which obviously creates a level of change and potential efficiencies. Outsourcing of services, as I said, mergers of full government departments or entities together, as well as the rationalisation or abolition of different entities where those entities no longer need to exist. And also, process improvements and performance improvements is something that we don't want to lose sight of, and we have actually had a lot of good conversations with government employees over the last 2 weeks, where there's a lot of good ideas out there around how things could be done better, and we're hoping to capture those as well. So I don't know if you want to get in.
Okay, that's good.
Thank you. Well, I think you've heard from all of us now on the different perspectives and the different levels of involvement and the different roles. So I don't know that there's very much I would like to say in addition to that at this point, but to open the floor to questions and we can take the discussion forward.
Mr. Premier, you brought it up, so.
I always do, don't I?
So it's your fault, not mine. No, you mentioned that right off at the start that one of the issues the UK is having trouble with in the current budget negotiations is the with the civil service costs or size of the staff.
I don't know that the UK is having problems with it. I'm having problems
You're
with
having
it.
problems with it. Well, is it something then that the UK is also having issues with? Is that affecting your negotiations and the ability to get the budget to the LA, or what are some of the issues a bit more specifically, if you don't mind?
All right, let me answer the last part of the question first. The budget that we've submitted to the UK conforms with all of the parameters that they've required. Our challenge has been getting it to conform. The 4-year plan, which we agreed with the UK, set ceilings with respect to overall government expenditure, a whole range of things. In the middle of that is the personnel component, which is fixed at $241 million. So we had to bring the budget in terms that comply with that. And the great challenge was with the proposal to fill 174 vacant posts and create 17 more. It just blew the budget by $8.6 million. So we had to get those things back in line. Not just to get the numbers right, but to understand that we're operating the public service of the Cayman Islands, and we have to have some degree of flexibility over the course of a year to fill positions, to hire new people. So it means you got to push the numbers down even more. So that's been the great challenge of this budget, really. I think on all other fronts we've done, all the numbers came in really, really good. Revenue is up above what we had proposed in the current budget. Expenditures below what we planned. We paid down debt, and the net debt is where we planned it to be, and expected it to be. In terms of the net debt, the debt service ratio, we were on target. In terms of the actual days of cash available, we're above target. So the troubling issue continues to be overall expenditure, operating expenditure of government, and the key component of that is the cost of the public service. So that's the relevance of this discussion to this conference.
And the UK hasn't given final approval yet.
No, we haven't had approval yet.
Do you expect that sometime?
I hope. We've now fixed the budget day as the 26th, subject to the UK's approval. And let me just clear this up. While there is some consternation and so forth on the part of some people, we have to give a minimum period of notice, which we've done, to start early. And that's why we've had to issue the notice now, even though we don't have final approval, because otherwise if we wait until final approval, then we push the date back even further, and we run into trouble at the end of the game because the budget has to be passed, approved, and implemented by the 1st of July.
And it's fair to say if you get it back from the UK and they don't okay what you've done, you'd be surprised at this stage.
Yeah, I'd be very surprised. I mean, we'll probably continue to have some discussions about aspects of it, but not the overall. I don't think there'll be a problem with the overall budget because we've come in within the parameters.
Okay. In terms of this review, can I verify that the cost for it from the public purse is still $155,000 for it to be conducted, or has that changed?
No, that was the agreed tender, and that's what we have agreed to. That's what we have signed up to. So it's 155,000 plus expenses.
And of course, I just missed that on the camera. That's what happens when you have to do two things.
Was there a rumor that it had gone up?
No, I just wanted to verify.
Okay.
I just wanted to verify. Okay. And as part of this, so is there any one particular area or areas that you're looking at in terms of this rationalization process? We talked in broad terms, broad strokes. Are you able to narrow it down as to what or which ones we are looking at?
No, I I was careful at the start to say that this is a rationalization process. E and Y are looking at all aspects of government and government services except the judiciary to see how those services can be provided more efficiently, more effectively, and to make recommendations about how we do that. It may well be, and I expect it will be, that there will be recommendations for certain services to be hived off to the private sector. But there are other ways that this can be dealt with and will be dealt with, including amalgamation of some services and so forth. Running concurrently with this, obviously, is the exercise of the committee, which is chaired by Councillor Roy McTaggart, that is looking at the public management and finance law, and to see and essentially rationalize what we're doing with respect to that. Because I mean, one of the consequences of that law has been, and the public service management law, has been the proliferation of a range of roles, HR roles and finance roles, and to see, and Larnie spoke to this, how we can share some of these services rather than having, dedicated HR and finance personnel for every department, agency, section within government.
So my question though is, as we go into this, and I know it's already started, it's just with an open view. There's no certain areas we are looking at in particular.
No preconceived ideas.
Okay.
Just when's the deadline for E&Y to submit this report for rationalization? And I think, Deputy Governor, you mentioned it a little bit about implementation, but we've seen so many reports like this come out in the pipeline and just sit on a shelf afterwards. Mm-hmm. How do we know that, A, you're going to work on this and make this put into and make sure it works and get it done?
Okay, well, the E&Y will have their report back to us around the end of June, and we will then pass it on to the elected government, and then we will have the discussions in terms of implementation. But I thank you for that question, because it is very important that we, this is not seen like in other exercise that's been done. This is different, as I said in my opening remarks. But I think why this will be a tremendous success is that we have a joined up approach. The Premier is here, I am here. We are the leaders of our respective entities, and we are both committed to making this happen. I have told chief officers and civil servants that the priorities of the government has to be our priorities. If the government says they would like to privatize or amalgamate, it is my job to make that happen. And I want to assure everybody here this morning that I will make it happen. Once our elected leaders give the mandates, make the decisions, and they will be tough, and we will understand that. But once they make the decisions, we will carry it out. But we will also have an overriding concern for our staff to make sure they are treated fairly and equitably, as I said before, and they know exactly what's happening in a timely manner.
And just a quick question, Larnie, you mentioned it earlier as well, that you've spoken with some people already. Will it be just department heads, or will you actually be speaking with the actual civil servants inside the departments as well? How widespread will the consultation be with the civil service?
So over the last 2 weeks, I think we've met with around 150 department heads, but they have brought a range of people with them. So in some of our meetings, there's been up to 40 people. These are direct service delivery roles. These are not just management or department heads or chief officers. So we've had a good range of input from, I think, all levels of the public service.
Question to the Premier. You said that rationalization is not privatization. However, Lani has suggested about IPOs, listing of government assets, and sale of the same. Will the government be at the same time maybe laying suitable infrastructure like a capital markets authority, or maybe expanding the Cayman Stock Exchange? And what does the FFR have to say about this?
Well, I don't think the FFR has anything to say about this aspect of it. With respect to the other two questions you asked, or I suppose anything is possible, but we certainly haven't focused on those two particular matters at this stage. Let me add this. I think this is important. It's almost 15 years since I was first elected. This is my fourth term. a lot has happened, a lot of changes have occurred in that time, including the introduction of the public management and finance law and the public service management law, which have fundamentally altered the way government goes about both its HR function and its finance management function. And there's been a lot of good that I've seen happen. But one of the consequences, which I alluded to just now, has been the growth, the proliferation of numbers in terms of personnel. In large part, I think, driven by these two pieces of legislation. You know, the ability of chief officers to be able to make decisions about hiring is something that came in with these two pieces of legislation. In the past, all of this was managed much more centrally, and therefore there was much more control at the center about the way these things have occurred. So I think we're at that stage where we really need, given what has transpired in the last 4 or 5 years, given the austerity which has had to be visited upon civil servants to be able to contain expenditure. Given the challenges that we've faced and continue to face, being able to fill frontline positions to be able to provide the level of services and qualitative services that we need in key areas like police and immigration and fire and police, prison and so forth. It is important that everyone, including your average civil servant, really take what we're doing very seriously and consider the reasons for it. The reality is this: the reason why this government is unable at this point to grant the civil servants the 3.2%, in fact, we think they ought to get more, based on inflation over the course of the last few years since 2010, since their salaries were cut, is because the personnel costs are just too high. And so we breached the ceiling to be able to do so. This is going to continue to be a struggle going forward, because the measures that have been taken over the past, in my view, are largely unsustainable in the long run, because it's about managing the vacancies, doing your best not to fill positions to keep costs down. Until we actually right-size the public service, and so that personnel costs bear the right proportion to the overall government expenditure, we're going to continue to face these sorts of challenges. Because it's not just, and it's important we understand, it's not just the salaries component, but it's the healthcare, which is burgeoning, and long-term pension commitment. So civil servants, I think, need to start to think about it in this way. If the numbers in the civil service are allowed to continue to grow, the ability of the government to pay decent salaries, to give raises to those who are actually in the civil service, to continue the generous benefit system or systems which are in place, get compromised more and more. And regardless of who's in government, the challenge is going to, and the pressure is going to continue to be, and the challenge is going to be, how do you reduce the cost, the overall cost of running the public service? And what's going to happen is that increasingly those benefits are going to get eroded. Civil servants' ability to earn decent salaries is going to be compromised because the government's not going to have the resources to do it. So, as I say, as one who's been around for some time and who was actually in government when the numbers really exploded through the roof, because that's when the public service management, the public finance and management law actually took effect, and we had this proliferation of posts. I am determined as Premier that is not going to occur under my watch. So we have to find a way, and we believe this is the way, this is the start of the way to go about it, to contain costs in a sustainable way so that we can give civil servants the salaries and increases that they need, that we can preserve the benefits which they have. And civil servants don't have to go year by year wondering if they're going to get a raise, whether they're going to get an increment, wondering whether, as has happened in the past, there's going to be another reduction because the numbers are just too high. We've got to stabilize the situation. We've got to create a sustainable course for the continued operations of the public service so that it is right size, it's got the right people in the right positions, able to provide the right services to the Cayman Islands and those that utilize government. So that's my thinking, and that is the thinking of the government which I have the honor to lead. And that is what has informed this process and our determination that we have to do something about it. This isn't about any effort on our part to cause civil servants to lose their jobs. And we are very conscious and very keen to ensure that the result of this is not that we wind up with significant numbers of civil servants looking for jobs which they can't get, because then we have another problem. And while there are others, particularly some in the media, who seem to think that that's all you do, you just send them off, and once you get the numbers right, as far as the government end is concerned, in dollar terms, that's the end of the issue. But it isn't the end of the issue. So we've got to take the time, which we're doing, to look at it carefully, sensitively, and as Mr. Scott said when we were discussing this before we came here, make sure that we get the right answer. Because when you don't do the right analysis, you rarely get the right answer.
Do you have an idea of the timeline in which you'd want to implement whatever the advice is coming out of the review? How soon would you be able to put that advice into effect?
Well, this is not a one-off thing. There are what I believe will be easier wins. There will be some services which are obviously and easily passed over to the private sector. There are some things that I believe will be easily outsourced. So I think that's how we'll start. Once we get the advice, we look at what it is that we can do quickly and easily and as painlessly as possible, while we take the time that's necessary to lay the groundwork for bigger moves, bigger transitions, if I may say that. Because if we decide to sell, as an example, if we decide to sell a government statutory authority, it may well be that we have to put in place certain legislation, because in that instance, we might wind up creating a monopoly or a duopoly. And then, of course, we got to think about the consequences of that as far as prices and so forth are concerned to the consumer. So you may have to put in place the necessary legislation. Those things take time. So we look at what's doable swiftly and lay the groundwork and create the roadmap to get to the end with respect to the more difficult and more complicated parts of the recommendations or advice.
Mr. Premier, you briefly touched on the compensation package. Will the process include a review of the pay grades, particularly in relation to pay for performance?
No, that's not part of this exercise.
Thank you.
Mr. Manderson, just have the Premier talk. When the Premier is talking, it seems fairly obvious to everyone listening that the overall number of people in the civil service has to be reduced. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned also just now easy wins that the government could have. I don't mean to sound prickly by asking this question, but why can't the government just do the easy stuff now? I mean, and in some sectors, this exercise is being perceived as we're going to go out and get, EY and they're going to be the mean old accountants and come in and chop everything off and then we can blame them. Is that what's going on here? Why can't the government do this, the easy stuff itself?
But the good news is we've done it, and we continue to do it. When I joined government over at immigration, we employed cleaners, and we employed people to do our gardening and all sorts of things. So over the years, we have made significant changes. We have privatized, cleaning, security, different areas of the government. We in the ministry where I was in before, we amalgamated two agencies. We had the Department of Telecommunications merged with Hazard Management. Just recently, Parks and Recreation merged with Public Works. So we've had a proven track record of making those decisions. But what we need now is additional expertise, because it is not, as the Premier has said, it is not as easy as just selling off or privatizing or amalgamating. We need to have sort of people with additional experience looking at the entire public sector and not us doing things piecemeal, so that we have a joined up approach to doing this properly and we know that it is going to work. Because that's the key. When we do things, it needs to work, and it needs to work for the betterment of the Cayman people. So we don't want to just do something for the sake of doing it. I have given a commitment to reduce the numbers in the civil service, and we have been doing that. But the Premier, and I endorse everything the Premier said in terms of the sustainability of those reductions. Your people are feeling it. So by us keeping the numbers down, by us doing everything we can to reduce the head count, it is causing our frontline services to be affected. So this is the way for us to achieve the reduction in the numbers, by simply stop doing some of the things that we're doing.
But Brent, forgive me, but I can't help myself with this one.
I'll ask that one for you.
But that line of questioning, which you just put to the Deputy Governor, continues the editorial that appeared in your paper, I think a couple of days ago, in which you were screaming essentially the same thing, which is, why don't you just do it? But on the front page of that same paper was, I think, as part of the headlines, was a story about bus wardens being privatized, and the complaints that some of them had, and the fears that some of them had about that exercise. So I'm just supporting what the Deputy Governor said, is that the government has been doing it. The reality is that we've got to do more, because as the exercise in preparing this budget has shown, there is still tremendous pressure, and in many instances it's proper pressure to provide more personnel in key areas, and government can only really do that if we are able to stop providing some of the services that we are currently providing. At least, not that the services stop getting provided, but they stop getting provided by government.
Just a quick follow-up. You hope to have some reductions or amalgamations and or whatever terminology you want to use done before the next budget. I'm assuming by this time next year we'll have a less or a leaner civil service. Is that what you're thinking? What's a timeline for actual implementation? I know you get the report in June. When is implementation really going to hit?
Well, we're continuing to do on both ends as much as we can to hold the line with respect to personnel numbers and therefore personnel costs. Even absent any report, as the Deputy Governor said, that exercise is ongoing, and I expect that we will be making some announcements about further amalgamations, probably in advance of that report, because we have taken certain decisions ourselves. As Brent said, the sort of easiest stuff that is just obvious to you that these can work. We can combine these two operations and achieve some savings with respect to personnel and operational costs, and still provide the functions. So it's not as though we're sitting on our hands just waiting with bated breath on the report. But we do believe that many of the key decisions that need to be taken need the benefit of professional advice, which is not available within the public service.
So no timeline.
Well, it's difficult for me to give you a timeline with respect to a report that isn't written.
This is a question either for the Premier or for the Deputy Governor. The private sector is obviously very critical of the size of government. Have you had very much commitment from specific employers, some of the larger employers here in particular, about their willingness to help with what could be a difficult transition for some people? And do you think that maybe government hasn't necessarily done a good enough job of selling the fact that the civil service is not just a good thing in terms of that they deliver the services that we need, but it actually does provide a function of ensuring that there is a safety net for people that can't get work necessarily in the private sector that easily, and that's not necessarily always a bad thing. If the private sector won't employ people, it's better that government employs them, surely, than for them to be doing nothing. And have we delivered that message well? And secondly, very much so, what kind of commitment have you got from the private sector that they're willing to take to absorb the people that will lose their jobs?
Well, Wendy, I'm afraid that's not a message I want to deliver. I think it is demeaning, really, of the public service to say it's a safety net, which into which should fall those that can't get employed elsewhere. I don't perceive the public service in that way. But the Chamber of Commerce President Johan Moxham has actually said some very helpful things, I think, recently about the need for the private sector to be willing and open to considering employing persons who transition from the public service. And so I think that is a good indication. I don't know if the Deputy Governor has had any other, but I thought that was very helpful and very encouraging.
I haven't had any further communication on that. No.
Question from Mr. Scott. I know that the Premier has emphasized rationalization, but do you have a sense that there will be some level of divesting or hiving off, as we say, at some point?
I mean, at this stage, we are clearly in data gathering stage, and I think at this point there's no preconceived notion as to where it goes. We really want to give the process the opportunity to look at it and look at all possibilities. So there are no early indications one way or the other. We haven't concluded on anything, to be frank.
Any more questions from the press?
Have we made everybody happy now? Brent, you okay?
Yeah.
You're always my principal concern.
That's a very high compliment, sir.
But seriously, everybody okay? Thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a nice weekend.
Long weekend.